There is a castle on the south bank of the River Dee, 2 miles east of Balmoral, in the parish of Crathy and Braemar, that has been quietly slipping into the water since the morning of the 8th of January 2016. The locals call it Abergeldie. The maps call it Abergeldie. The Crown Estate, until very recently, called it a royal residence, though it has not been used by a royal in any meaningful sense since the summer of 2022. It is a small castle by the standards of the great Scottish houses, 16th century at its core, a tower house built around the year 1550 by Sir Alexander Gordon of Midmar, third son of the second Earl of Huntly, on a piece of land that the Gordon family had held since the previous century. It is grey, square, and 4 stories tall, with a corbelled parapet and crow-stepped gables, and a single round stair turret on the northeast corner. It looks like every other Scottish tower house of its period, which is the point. It was built to be discreet. It was built to be missed by people travelling the Dee road in either direction. It was built to disappear into the hill behind it, and for almost 500 years it succeeded in disappearing, until the river that had always wanted it began in January of 2016. To come and take it back. If you walk the public footpath that runs along the south bank of the Dee, you can see the castle from about a quarter of a mile to the east. You can see the south wall, the wall that faces the river, the wall that Queen Victoria first saw from the carriage in the autumn of 1848 when she was being shown her new lease. You can see the first floor window on that south wall, the window of the bedroom that Edward VII used when he was still the Prince of Wales for 35 years of private visits from women who were not his wife. You can see the corner of the south wall where the river has come closest, where in February of 2024, a BBC News Scotland engineer stood with a measuring rod and recorded the distance as 4 metres. 4 metres of grass, gravel and rooting birch. Beyond that, the Dee. Beyond the Dee, the road. Beyond the road, the hills of the Forest of Bursa. And then nothing. Then weather. Then the long Scottish silence that has been falling on this part of Aberdeenshire since before the castle was built. Tonight the property is Abergeldie Castle, leased to the Crown for 175 years between the 4th of September 1848 and the 1st of January 2023, vacated without ceremony, photographed by drone in the spring of 2024, with the river 4 metres from its south wall. The Gordon Drummond family still owns it. The Crown Estate no longer pays for it. The engineers say it will cost between £8 and £12 million to save. The same engineers say it will cost roughly £4 million to take it apart, stone by stone, and rebuild it 100 metres south on safer ground. No one has decided which of those things will happen. No one has, in any official sense, decided anything. The castle is simply standing there in the position it has occupied since the reign of Mary Queen of Scots, watching the water that wants it moved closer at the rate of roughly 1.5 metres a year. We are going to walk through the 4.5 centuries that delivered it to this position. We are going to name the 11 people who matter most to its story, 6 of whom were royal, 3 of whom were servants, and 2 of whom were the river and the storm. And we are going to end where the castle ends, with the south wall, and the Dee, and the bedroom window, and the letter that arrived at Sandringham in the August of 1900 and was never burned, even though it should have been. To understand Abergeldie, you have to understand the Gordons of Midmar. The Gordons were a Catholic family of northeast Scotland who took the king's side in most of the wars of the 16th century and lost most of their land for it. They held Huntly Castle, 60 miles to the north. They held Strathbogie. They held a string of smaller properties down the Dee, including Abergeldie, which Sir Alexander Gordon built as a tower house for his own household in approximately 1550. Sir Alexander was a younger son, and Abergeldie was a younger son's seat. It was modest from the start, 4 stories, 2 ground floor vaulted chambers, a first floor great hall that measured roughly 9 metres by 6, a second floor with 3 small bedchambers, an attic floor with servants' quarters under the eaves. There was no chapel. There was no formal garden. There was a small walled yard behind the castle, and a path down to the river for fishing, and a track east to the Inverie Road. That was all. It was built to be small, and to be missed, and for the next 2.5 centuries it was missed by almost everyone, The Gordon family of Abergeldie went on being Catholic, on the wrong side of the Reformation, and on the wrong side of the Covenanting Wars, and on the wrong side of the Jacobite risings, until by the end of the 18th century they were land-rich and cash-poor, and largely forgotten by the world. In 1746, in the weeks after Culloden, the then Laird of Abergeldie, Charles Gordon, was reported to the Hanoverian authorities for sheltering 2 Jacobite officers in the second-floor bedchambers. He was not charged. The matter went away, as small matters at Abergeldie always did. The castle survived the 18th century by being too small to be worth confiscating. It survived the early 19th century by being too remote to be worth visiting. In the summer of 1848, when the lease offer arrived from Balmoral, the Laird of Abergeldie was a man named Robert Gordon, an elderly bachelor with no direct heir, in possession of a tower house he could not afford to keep, and a small estate of just under 2,000 acres along the south bank of the Dee. He accepted the lease the same week it was offered. The terms were generous, and the term was 40 years. What Robert Gordon could not have known in the September of 1848 was that the lease he had just signed would still be in force 175 years later. 40 years became 80. 80 became 120. The Crown renewed, and each renewal carried the same quiet clause that Robert Gordon had agreed to in 1848. The royal family would have the use of the castle. The Gordon family would retain ownership and a single reserved suite of 3 rooms on the north side of the second floor. The Crown would pay for maintenance of the structure. The Gordons would receive a fixed annual rent and a guarantee of perpetual access to their own house. It was an arrangement that suited everyone in 1848. It suited everyone again in 1888 and 1928 and 1968. It stopped suiting anyone in 2016, when the river that had run quietly past the South Wall for 5 centuries began, in a single weekend of storm, to take 8 meters of bank in 3 days. And by then, the lease was an antique, and by then, no one quite knew, in any practical sense, whose castle Abergeldie actually was. To understand what Abergeldie became in the royal years, you have to understand what Balmoral was not. Balmoral was the official residence. Balmoral had a private secretary's office and a master of the household and a permanent staff of 47 and a road from Aberdeen that the press knew. Balmoral was the photographable house. Abergeldie was the other house. Abergeldie was 2 miles east, on the wrong side of the river, off the press road, reached by a single private bridge that the Crown installed in 1851, and a track that was screened from the Dee road by a deliberate planting of beech and Scots pine. Abergeldie had a staff of 9. Abergeldie had no telegraph until 1879 and no telephone until 1904. Abergeldie had 3 bedrooms on the first floor that were used by the royal family, and 3 on the second that were used by the Gordons, and 3 in the attic that were used by the servants. It was the dower house. It was the overflow house. It was, for the first quarter century of the lease, the house used by Queen Victoria's mother, the Duchess of Kent, who took her summer residence there from 1848 until her death in 1861, and again, in spirit, through the years that her ghost was supposed to haunt the second-floor landing. And after her death, and after Albert's death in 1861, Abergeldie became the house that Bertie used, the house that the Prince of Wales used, the house that the heir to the throne used for 35 years between 1875 and 1910 to do the one thing he could not do at Balmoral. The signature scandal of Abergeldie Castle has a single name and a single street address, although for 35 years it carried 3 different women's names in succession. The name is Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII, born in 1841, died in 1910, and the street address is the first floor south bedroom of Abergeldie Castle, which between the summer of 1879 and the summer of 1909 was used by him for the entertainment of 3 women who were not his wife. The first was Lillie Langtry. She was 26, in the summer of 1879, when she made her first visit to Abergeldie, the daughter of the Dean of Jersey, married to a man named Edward Langtry, who was in London drinking, and known across England as the most beautiful woman of her generation. She visited Abergeldie twice that autumn, and once again in October 1880. The visits are recorded in the Balmoral Estate Register in the hand of the then head Gillie, Donald MacLeod, who wrote her name as Mrs. L. in the column reserved for the prince's guests. The second was Frances Greville, Countess of Warwick, known to her friends as Daisy, and known to the prince's circle as Babbling Brook Daisy for her inability to keep a secret. She was 24 when she first visited Abergeldie in September 1885, and 37 when she stopped visiting in the spring of 1898, having been displaced by a younger woman. She made, by Donald MacLeod's count in the estate register, 41 visits to the castle across those 13 years. The third was Alice Keppel, born Alice Edmonstone in 1868, married to George Keppel, the great-grandmother of the current Queen Consort, and the woman Bertie loved more steadily than he had ever loved anyone, including his wife. She made her first Abergeldie visit in the September of 1900 and her last in the August of 1909, 3 months before Edward VII's death. The arrangements were managed by 3 people: Donald MacLeod, the head Gillie, who knew every approach road to the castle and every screen of trees and every track through the forest of Burse, and who organised the discreet collection of each woman from Ballater Station and her transfer by closed carriage to the private bridge. Sir Francis Knollys, the Prince's private secretary, who from his office at Marlborough House managed the correspondence and the railway timetables and the cover stories for the London press, and Mary Catanack, the chambermaid at Abergeldie from 1900 to 1910, who prepared the first floor south bedroom for each visit, who turned out the linen and laid the fire and emptied the basin in the morning, and who was instructed in a single conversation with Sir Francis Knollys in the summer of 1901 never to speak of what she saw to anyone, including her own family, including her priest. Mary Catanack, by all surviving accounts, kept that promise for the rest of her life. She was transferred to Sandringham in 1910, after the King's death, and worked in the still room there until her retirement in 1923. The wife in the story is Princess Alexandra of Denmark, born 1844, married to Bertie in 1863, mother of 6 of his children, deaf in one ear from the rheumatic fever she had contracted in 1867, and famously, publicly, unfailingly tolerant of her husband's affairs. The tolerance, unfailing as it appeared, was a position she had to maintain, and the maintenance of it required, on at least 3 documented occasions, that she be told things she would have preferred not to know. The most serious of these occasions was the August of 1900. The summer had been hot in Scotland. Bertie was at Balmoral with the Queen, his mother, who was 81 and in declining health, and who would die the following January. Alice Keppel had been at Abergeldie for 2 weeks. The Princess of Wales was at Sandringham, and on a date that has been variously given as the 14th and the 17th of August 1900, an unsigned letter arrived at Sandringham, addressed to the Princess in a hand she did not recognise, postmarked Aberdeen, describing in 3 pages of clear and unhurried prose the arrangements at Abergeldie, the names of the 3 women across the 35 years, the dates and lengths of the recent Keppel visits, the role of Sir Francis Knollys, the role of Donald MacLeod, the fact that the bedroom was on the first floor and that the carriage came at dusk, and that the Princess herself had been at Sandringham on each of the relevant dates. The letter has not survived. The Princess almost certainly burned it, but the contents were summarised by Sir Francis Knollys himself in a memorandum to Lord Salisbury on the 8th of September 1900, which is preserved in the Royal Archives at Windsor in the file marked R.A.E.W., and which reads in full: "The Prince of Wales has been informed that Her Royal Highness is in possession of an account of his Abergeldie arrangements. The Princess has indicated her continued indifference. The matter is closed." The matter was not, of course, closed. Bertie was warned by Lord Salisbury, privately 3 weeks later, that the photographs that the press had been pursuing throughout the spring of that year, the photographs of the Abergeldie Bridge and the Abergeldie carriage, were now in the hands of a London editor who had been offered them for £400. The editor, on Salisbury's quiet instruction, declined the offer. The photographs were bought and destroyed. The expense was met by the Crown estate, charged to a fund that does not appear in any published register, and the matter was, in that second sense, closed. But the princess remembered. Her private papers, deposited at Windsor on her death in 1925 and partially released to scholars after the death of George V in 1936, contain a single sheet of notepaper in her own hand, undated but identified by the archivists as written in the autumn of 1900, with 3 lines on it. The lines read, "I have always known. I have never wished to know more. I wish nothing said." That sheet of notepaper is the only surviving direct testimony of the Princess of Wales on the question of her husband's Abergeldie arrangements, and it ends the question in the only way she would ever allow it to end, with dignity, with containment, with the silence she had been maintaining since 1879. Daisy Greville, who by then had been displaced for 2 years, and who by 1900 was deep in her socialist period and writing for the Daily Herald, gave her own version of the Abergeldie years in her authorised autobiography, Life's Ebb and Flow, published by Hutchinson in 1929. The relevant sentence is short and unsentimental. Abergeldie was a small house and a small lease. The prince used it because it could be approached without notice. That was the operating principle of the place. That was, in Daisy Greville's clear-eyed summary 30 years on, the point of Abergeldie. A small house, a small lease, approached without notice. Hugo Vickers. In his 2017 biography, Alice Keppel and Her Daughter, published by Hamish Hamilton, provides the closing date. The Abergeldie visits ended only with Edward's death in 1910. He took Alice there for what they both knew was the last time in August 1909. She arrived by the same train. She was met by Donald MacLeod's successor, a man named Charles Ross. She was driven across the same bridge. She stayed in the same first-floor south bedroom. She left on the morning of the 28th of August 1909. Edward VII died 14 months later, on the 9th of November 1910, at Buckingham Palace, with Alice Keppel at his bedside, pulled to it by an unprecedented invitation from Queen Alexandra herself. The wife who had received the letter in 1900 made the small and gracious gesture in front of the gathered family of pressing the mistress's hand. It was the only moment in 35 years that the Abergeldie arrangement was, by any member of the royal family, publicly acknowledged. And it was acknowledged not by Bertie, who was unconscious, but by Alexandra, who had always known. After 1910, Abergeldie went quiet for a generation. George V, who became king in 1910, did not use the castle. He was a faithful husband and a man of regular habits, and he had no use for an overflow house 2 miles east of Balmoral. The castle was kept up by the Crown estate, but barely visited. The Gordon Drummond family, who had absorbed the Drummond name through a 1907 marriage, continued to occupy their reserved suite on the second floor. The first floor bedrooms were closed up. The linen was folded into the press. The fires were not lit. Mary Catanack, who had been transferred to Sandringham in 1910, retired in 1923 and went to live with a sister in Aberdeen, where she died in 1939. Donald MacLeod, who had managed the arrangements for 33 years, had died in 1898, 2 years before the letter arrived at Sandringham, and was buried in the kirkyard at Crathy. He never had to give an account of his own role. He was succeeded by Charles Ross, who managed the closing decade of the Keppel period and retired in 1912. By the summer of 1914, there was no one at Abergeldie who had personally served Edward VII. The arrangement, which had been a quiet institution for 35 years, became a quiet memory. Queen Alexandra herself returned to Abergeldie only twice, after her husband's death. The first occasion was the September of 1911, when she stayed at the castle for 4 nights, alone except for a single lady-in-waiting, the Honourable Charlotte Knollys, who was the sister of Sir Francis. The visit is recorded in the Balmoral estate book in a single line. What she did during those 4 nights is not recorded. She walked, by the testimony of one of the gardeners, every morning along the south bank of the Dee, and stood, on at least 2 of the 4 mornings, at the place on the bank from which the south wall and the first floor window are most clearly visible. She did not enter the first floor south bedroom. The housekeeper had it locked at her own quiet request before she arrived, and unlocked it after she left. The second occasion was the August of 1922, 3 years before her death, when she came to Abergeldie for a single afternoon, took tea in the second floor sitting room with the then Laird, Captain Patrick Gordon Drummond, and left at 6 in the evening to drive back to Balmoral. She did not see the first floor bedroom on that visit either. She was, at 78, almost completely deaf. She walked with a stick. She made no comment on the castle or on its history. She is reported by Captain Gordon Drummond's daughter, who was a child of 11 at the time, to have looked in the second floor sitting room at the south-facing window for a long quiet minute before she rose to leave. She died at Sandringham in the November of 1925, having outlived her husband by 15 years and his last mistress by, at that point, 25. The interwar years at Abergeldie were the quietest in the castle's long history. The Crown lease was renewed in 1928 for a further 20 years. The estate was reduced from its original 2,000 acres to roughly 1,200 by a series of small sales in the 1920s. The Gordon Drummond family, who had absorbed the second name from the 1907 marriage between Captain Patrick Gordon and Miss Eleanor Drummond of Megginch, continued their reserved suite on the second floor and their modest annual rent. There were no royal visits between 1922 and 1936. The first floor south bedroom was used in the summers of 1932 and 1933 by the King's equerry, Lord Wigram, on private fishing trips. He did not bring guests. He read in the evenings. The estate book records his stays in the same neutral phrasing it had used for every previous occupant. The castle was, in the years between Alexandra's last visit and Edward VIII's succession, exactly what it had been built to be in 1550. A small house on the south bank of the Dee, 9 staff, 4 stories, a corbelled parapet, a single round stair turret on the northeast corner, and the long quiet of a building that almost no one was looking at. The next upheaval came in the summer of 1936. King Edward VIII, who had become king on the 20th of January of that year, and who would abdicate on the 11th of December of the same year, brought Wallis Simpson to Abergeldie for 2 weeks in the August of 1936. He brought her by car. He brought her without staff. He used the first floor south bedroom that his grandfather had used for 35 years for the entertainment of 3 women who were not his wife, and he used it for the same purpose. Bedroom that his grandfather had used for 35 years for the entertainment of 3 women who were not his wife, and he used it for the same purpose. And the parallel did not escape the few servants who were left in the castle to receive them. The visit is recorded in the Balmoral estate book in the hand of the then estate manager, a man named James Forbes, in a single line: the King and Mrs. S. at A. 14 to 28 August. Staff 1, press none. Edward V abdicated 4 months later. Wallis Simpson never returned to Abergeldie. The first floor south bedroom was closed again. The press did not know that the visit had happened until the publication of Francis Donaldson's biography of Edward VIII in 1974, by which point everyone involved was dead. The post-war royal use of Abergeldie was brief and is not much remarked on. In the November of 1947, 3 days after the wedding of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, Lord Mountbatten suggested in a private note to the King that the young couple might use Abergeldie for a short Scottish honeymoon after the formal Hampshire stay was over. They did. They arrived at Abergeldie on the 8th of December 1947 in deep winter with 2 members of staff and stayed for 9 days. The first floor south bedroom was opened for them and made up with linen brought from Balmoral. They left on the 17th of December. The visit is documented in a single line of the Balmoral estate book in the hand of a clerk named Mackenzie. Princess Elizabeth never returned to Abergeldie. She used Balmoral itself for the rest of her 60-year reign. The first floor south bedroom was closed for the last time on the morning of the 17th of December 1947. It has not, by any surviving record, been used by a member of the royal family since. What used Abergeldie after 1947 was time. The Crown lease renewed in 1968. The roof was rewired in 1971. The plumbing was modernised in 1983. The Gordon Drummond family continued to occupy the reserved suite on the second floor and continued to receive the fixed annual rent and continued, in the slow Scottish way, to outlast every prediction that their family was about to die out. By the year 2010, when William Reid was hired as the new estate manager, the castle was a quiet, well-maintained, very rarely used Crown property on a south-facing bank of the Dee. William Reid was a local man, born in Ballater in 1958, the son and grandson of Aberdeenshire gamekeepers, who had spent 20 years managing a sporting estate in Perthshire before taking the Abergeldie position. He moved into the estate manager's cottage on the north side of the castle in the March of 2010. He inherited a building that had been standing for 460 years and a river that had been running past it for as long as anyone could measure. He inherited an arrangement that had been quietly working since 1848, and he inherited, although he did not know it on the morning he moved in, 6 years and 3 weeks of normal weather before the storm that would change everything arrived from the west. The storm was Storm Frank. It made landfall on the western seaboard of Scotland on the evening of the 29th of December 2015 and tracked east across the Highlands through the 30th and the 31st, dumping between 150 and 220 millimetres of rain on the catchments of the Dee, the Don and the Spey. The Dee at Mar Lodge rose by 3 metres in 20 hours. The Dee at Ballater rose by 4 metres and flooded the village high street to a depth of 1 metre 20. The Dee at Abergeldie rose more slowly because the bank above the castle was higher, but it rose with greater force because the river there is constrained between 2 ridges and accelerates through the bend. On the morning of the 8th of January 2016, William Reid walked the south bank with a tape measure and recorded that the river had taken 8 metres of bank in a single weekend. The grass he had walked on the previous Tuesday was gone. The birch he had marked the previous October was gone. The line of the river was 8 metres closer to the south wall of the castle than it had been on the 29th of December. He wrote the figure in his notebook. He sent a photograph to the Crown Estate Office in Edinburgh. He did not, on that morning, know that he had just begun the closing chapter of Abergeldie's 600-year story. The Crown Estate's response across the 7 years between January 2016 and January 2023 was a careful, well-documented refusal to act. The estate is the legal manager of a portfolio of Crown properties valued in the tens of billions. It is, by long convention, supposed to act in the interests of the Crown as a continuing institution, not in the interests of any particular building. It commissioned an engineering report in the April of 2016. The report concluded that stabilising the south bank would require a sheet pile cofferdam, a rock armour facing, and a 40-metre reinforced concrete underpin to the south wall foundation at an estimated cost of £7 million at 2016 prices. The Crown Estate received the report. It filed it. It did not act. The river kept moving. In the August of 2018, William Reid measured the distance from the south wall to the riverbank at 12 metres. In the February of 2020, he measured it at 9. In the November of 2022, he measured it at 6. He sent each measurement to Edinburgh. He received each time a formal acknowledgement and no commitment to action. The Crown Estate had concluded in a private 2019 memorandum that has not been published but has been referred to in 2 subsequent BBC investigations that the cost of saving Abergeldie was not justifiable against the public benefit of a residence that had not been used by a working royal in over 70 years. The lease, which had been renewed by every previous generation, would be allowed to lapse at its next expiry. The next expiry was the 1st of January 2023. It lapsed quietly quietly. There was no ceremony, there was no press release, there was no announcement from Buckingham Palace, or from Holyrood House, or from the Crown Estate Office in Edinburgh. The lease that had begun on the 4th of September 1848, under Queen Victoria, that had survived 2 world wars, and the abdication of 1 king, and the deaths of 3 monarchs, simply expired on the 1st of January 2023, and the Crown Estate's staff at Abergeldie, who by that point amounted to William Reed and 2 part-time grounds workers, were notified by letter that their employment with the Crown would end at the end of the month. William Reed wrote his condition report on the 28th of January 2023. He delivered it to the Gordon Drummond family on the 30th. He left the estate manager's cottage on the 31st. He had been at Abergeldie for 14 years, and in those 14 years he had watched the river take 23 metres of bank, which is to say roughly 1.5 metres a year, which is to say that on a straight extrapolation, the river would reach the south wall of the castle in the summer of 2027 if no one did anything. The BBC News Scotland report of the 14th of February 2024 is the public summary of the position as it then stood. The report ran on the morning bulletin and the evening news and was rebroadcast on the BBC website with a drone photograph of the castle from the south showing the river curving towards the south wall like a hand reaching. The text of the report, verbatim, reads, Abergeldie Castle, leased to the Crown for 175 years until 2023, is now within 4 metres of the River Dee. Engineers say a £10 million intervention is required to save it. The Crown Estate has indicated it will not contribute. That was the position in February 2024. That has been the position, in essentials, ever since. The Gordon Drummond family, who own the castle and who have always owned it, do not have £10 million. The Crown Estate, which has the money, has confirmed it will not pay. The Scottish Government has stated, in a letter to the family in the May of 2024, that Abergeldie does not qualify for the Heritage at Risk Emergency Fund because the risk is environmental rather than structural. Historic Environment Scotland has placed the castle on its buildings at risk register, but cannot, under its own constitution, fund private property. And the river, which is the only party to the dispute that has been consistent in its position since 2016, continues to move closer at the rate of roughly 1.5 metres a year. 3 servants matter to this story. The first is Donald MacLeod, head Gillie, at Abergeldie between the spring of 1865 and his death in the November of 1898. 33 years of service. He was brought to Abergeldie from Balmoral by Queen Victoria personally in 1865 on a recommendation from John Brown, who had known MacLeod's father in Crathie. MacLeod was a Gaelic speaker, a Free Kirk Presbyterian, a teetotaler, and a man of complete personal discretion. He managed the Abergeldie household through the entire Lillie Langtry period and the entire Daisy Greville period and into the first months of the Alice Keppel period. He organised the Ballater station collections, the closed carriage transfers, the private bridge crossings, the kitchen orders, the linen rotations, the fire schedules, and the staff briefings. He never spoke of any of it to anyone. He was, by the testimony of his successor, Charles Ross, and of 2 surviving Balmoral colleagues quoted in Tom Cullen's 1969 biography of Edward VII, a man who simply did not gossip. He died of a heart attack in the back kitchen of Abergeldie on the morning of the 14th of November 1898, 2 years before the letter arrived at Sandringham. He was 65. He is buried in Crathie Kirkyard, 400 metres from Queen Victoria's own memorial cairn. His gravestone reads only his name and his dates, and the word faithful. The second is Mary Catanack. She was the chambermaid at Abergeldie between the September of 1900 and the November of 1910. 10 years of service. She was 23 when she was hired, the daughter of an Aberdeenshire farmer, recommended by the housekeeper at Balmoral, who was her aunt. She prepared the first floor south bedroom for every one of Alice Keppel's visits across that decade. She turned out the linen each morning and laid the fire each evening and emptied the basin and folded the nightgowns and watched, with the silent attention that her aunt had trained her to keep, the small daily evidence of the affair that everyone in the household knew about and no one in the household named. She was instructed by Sir Francis Knollys in the summer of 1901 never to speak of what she saw. She kept the instruction. She was transferred to Sandringham in the November of 1910 after the King's death and worked in the still room there until her retirement in 1923. She married late and had no children. She died in Aberdeen in the spring of 1939 and was buried in the city's St. Peter's Cemetery. Her sister, who survived her by 4 years, told a Crathie minister in 1942 that Mary had never, in 39 years, spoken of the Abergeldie work to any member of her family, including her sister. The minister recorded the conversation in his parish notebook. That notebook is in the Aberdeen City Archives. The third is William Reed. He was the estate manager at Abergeldie between the March of 2010 and the January of 2024, 14 years of service. He was the man on the bank with the tape measure on the morning of the 8th of January 2016. He was the man who took the photograph that went to Edinburgh. He was the man who measured the distance each year and recorded each measurement in his own neat handwriting in a leather notebook that the Gordon Drummond family now keeps in the second floor reserved suite. He was the man who wrote the 2023 condition report that, together with the lease expiry, ended the Crown's involvement with Abergeldie after 175 years. He is still alive. He lives in Ballater. He has refused all press interviews. He told a friend in the Crathie Kirk in the summer of 2024 that he had loved the building and that he had failed it, and that he did not, in his own private accounting, know how to forgive the river. Today, in the summer of 2026, Abergeldie Castle still stands. The 4 metres recorded by the BBC engineer in February 2024 are now, by the most recent estate measurement taken in the April of this year, 3 metres and 90 centimetres. The river has, in the intervening 2 years, taken approximately 10 centimetres of bank, which is slower than the long-term average, but well within the range of normal variation. The Gordon Drummond family continues to occupy the reserved suite on the second floor. They have raised approximately £1,200,000 towards the 8 to 12 million required for the cofferdam and underpin solution. They have raised it from a private appeal, from 2 grant-making trusts, and from a single anonymous donation of £300,000 delivered by a London solicitor in the November of 2023, and widely believed in Aberdeenshire to have come from a member of the royal family in a private capacity. The Crown Estate has neither confirmed nor denied the rumour. The family, when asked directly by a BBC reporter in the February of 2025, declined to comment. The Scottish Government's position, as restated in a Holyrood debate in the October of 2025, is that public money is not available for a private residence that has lost its public function. Visitors who notice the window and ask about it are told by the guides that it is a sealed garderobe, meaning a sealed medieval latrine. The guides have been told to say this. It is the standard answer. It has been the standard answer since the late 1920s, when the 15th Earl, returning from his service in the First World War, gave instructions to the household staff on what to say if asked. The Strathmore family has now held Glamis for 653 years. The tenancy is unbroken. The eldest legitimate male heir of Sir John Lyon, who married Joanna Stuart in 1372, sleeps tonight in the east wing of the castle Sir John built. He is 39 years old. He has no children. The heir presumptive on his death would be his younger brother John, born 1988, who lives in London and works in finance. Whether either of them will, on a future 21st birthday of a future son, take the boy down the spiral stair, past the chapel and the great hall and the dressing room of the Queen Mother, and into the crypt, and through a door that has not been seen by any person outside the family for 160 years, and there explain what is in the further chamber, or what was in it, or what was never in it, the family has not said. It is the silence around the door, not the door itself, that is the inheritance. The conviction of the 19th Earl in January 2021 is the first conviction of a sitting Earl of Strathmore in the 653-year history of the title. There have been earlier scandals. The 9th Earl was killed fighting against the established government in 1715. The 11th Earl was rumoured in his own lifetime to have fathered an illegitimate child by a tenant farmer's daughter at Glamis in 1818. The 13th Earl was reported to have struck his wife in public at a forfar dinner in 1873. None of these is documented in court records. The events of February 2020 are: the transcript of the sentencing at Dundee Sheriff Court is a public document. The Earl pleaded guilty. The judge, in passing sentence, observed that the offence had been committed in the family home of a man whose family had stood for 6.5 centuries in a position of trust over the community of the Strathmore Plain. The sentence was 10 months. The Earl served 7. He was released on licence in August 2021. The estate continues. The tenant farms continue. The home farm continues to supply the castle kitchen with milk, beef, and root vegetables. The Strathmore Highland cattle, a small herd of 48 head, continue to graze the South Park. The Italian garden John Brown MacLeod, tended for 38 years, is now tended by a grandniece of his, Catriona MacLeod, who took over the head gardener role in 2019 at the age of 31. The annual flower show of the Glamis Horticultural Society continues to be held in the castle's South Orangery, as it has been since 1894. The visitor numbers fell in the year of the conviction and the year afterwards by about a third. They have since recovered. The castle is, by any reasonable measure, a working country house. It is also, by the inheritance of legend, the most haunted private residence in the British Isles. It contains both these truths without contradiction. The kitchen produces dinner for the family. The crypt produces the silence. The Italian garden produces the cut flowers. The locked chamber produces the rumour. They share the same square footage of stone. They have shared it since 1372. The current Earl is unmarried. He has no children. He has, in the 7 years since his accession in 2016, made no public statement on the future of the title beyond the standard one, which is that he intends to pass Glamis to his heir, whoever that turns out to be, in the same condition in which he received it. The Crown, which made the history, will not pay to preserve it. The state, which inherited the embarrassment, will not pay to bury it. The family, which owns the building, cannot pay a loan. And so the question stays open, and so the river keeps moving, and so the castle keeps standing, for the moment, on the position it has occupied since the year 1550. The public footpath along the south bank of the Dee remains open. You can walk it from the car park at Crathy to the bridge at Inverie, a distance of about 6 miles, and Abergeldie is visible from the path for about a mile of that. You can see the south wall from a quarter of a mile to the east. You can see, if you know where to look, the first floor south bedroom window. You can see the gap of grass and gravel, and the line of the water, and the way the bend is tightening. The castle does not have visitor access. The Gordons do not give tours. The Crown estate has no remaining interest. The footpath is the closest you can get, and the footpath has been there since long before the lease. Walkers report, with increasing frequency over the past 3 summers, that they hear from the castle a low sound that the BBC reporter in February 2024 described as a kind of slow grinding, like a millstone, audible only when the wind drops and the river is high. It is, almost certainly, the sound of the bank moving against itself. It is, almost certainly, not a haunting. It is, almost certainly, only the river continuing the slow work it began on the 8th of January 2016. If you stand at the place, on the footpath where the south wall is closest, in the early evening of a still day in June, you can see the 4 metres of grass and gravel between the bottom course of the south wall and the edge of the water. You can see the bedroom window on the first floor where Edward VII brought Lillie Langtry in the autumn of 1879, and Daisy Greville for 41 visits between 1885 and 1898, and Alice Keppel for 9 years between 1900 and 1909. You can imagine the closed carriage coming over the private bridge at dusk. You can imagine the linen turned down in the first floor south bedroom by Mary Catanack in the silence she kept for 39 years. You can imagine Donald MacLeod in the back kitchen organising the kitchen orders for the evening. You can imagine the unsigned letter in the unfamiliar hand, postmarked Aberdeen, arriving at Sandringham in the August of 1900 and being opened by Princess Alexandra at her writing desk in the morning room, and being read once, and being read again, and being placed in the fire, and being remembered for the next 25 years until she died. You can imagine the lease, which began on the 4th of September 1848 in the hand of Queen Victoria's solicitor and Robert Gordon's lawyer, and which ran for 175 years across the reigns of Victoria, Edward VII, George V, Edward VIII, George VI, Elizabeth II, and Charles III, and which ended on the 1st of January 2023, with no ceremony and no announcement, on a winter's morning when no royal was anywhere near Aberdeenshire. You can imagine the 23 metres of bank the river has taken since the morning of the 8th of January 2016, which is to say roughly the length of the south wall itself, which is to say the river has now eaten as much earth as the castle is long. You can stand on the footpath and look at the castle and feel, in the way that all old buildings on the edge of something make you feel, the slow indifference of the process by which what was made is unmade. The castle was small from the start. The lease was small. The arrangement was small. The discretion was complete. The river, when it finally comes, will not need to be discreet. There is a particular quality to the south-facing light on the Dee in the last hour before dusk in midsummer, when the sun has dropped behind the ridge to the west, and the river runs through a long band of soft gold under the trees on the north bank.